Hey guys, so here we are again talking about what I mentioned a few videos ago, and that was on the complexity of Swift and why it's a mess, right? So I want to jump back into it, and I want to talk about a few things that I have learned recently from watching some content from LNK and a few other people. And I know a lot of it has to do more on the research side of things, but I think it says a lot about the problems that we're facing with regards to how we're making things a lot more complex for ourselves than we need to be. I mean, the problem now has become so embedded because it's built upon the issues of things that have happened like 10, 15 years ago. And if you, the reason I'm coming to this point is if you look at something like SmallTalk, right? SmallTalk was a language that was built in the 70s, and it does a lot more, and it gives us a lot more ability to investigate our code, our data structures, and visualize the content, visualize the functions, a lot more so than can with Swift and Xcode, which is like 30 years later. Same thing with C++. It's just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of feature to the point where it's just a mess. It's just an absolute horrendous mess of options with what you can do. Now, look, I'm not invalidating the amazing work and the excitement and the cool stuff that has been put into these languages by amazingly intelligent people. But I believe that it's all based on this kind of foundation of let's just add it, right? You kind of like, you have this tunnel vision that you're working on something and you're lost you're in this bubble, right? And so while you're in this bubble, you don't really notice things from outside that bubble. And so you're in the Swift bubble, and there's these things that are missing, and someone, thinks of this as a good idea and convinces everybody to add this, and then you have all these features that are added, and you have these continually added features to the point where it resembles, a bit of a mishmash of things. Swift, if you've worked with Swift, you'll know this is specifically by the idea of protocol-driven development. And at the beginning, it was a great idea, but I think the execution kind of fell apart and just, it faded into kind of the mess that Swift became. And the reason for that is because then, there was still this kind of entanglement with generics, and you could do things in protocols that you can't do with generics, and kind of expanded protocols to support, this kind of type erasure, and then you had the whole cool stuff with reactive programming. So they built Combine, and Swift features were adapted for Combine, and then Swift features were adapted for Swift UI, and Swift became this kind of like amalgamation, Frankenstein thing of what needed to happen to get Swift UI to work properly and what to get Combine to work properly. And the thing is with Combine, it's now essentially unsupported. No one is really working on it. There hasn't been a release for 4 years, but Swift's changes is still there, and then you're still kind of working around that. And sure, I mean, I've made good use of these things where I can, but I feel that it's become this, it's become like this language has become like, it has these kind of like little sub-languages inside of it. It's not a tool to do specific things. It's become an entire platform. Swift has become an entire platform in and of itself. So what I'm trying to say is that we've really created a lot more complexity than we've had to. So what can I suggest is a good path forward? Like, I think in future, the languages that we build should be defined by a specific use case. And I know this means, more languages and different syntax and all those kind of things. But these days, it's so easy to adapt and learn and pick up procedural and functional languages that we don't need to do the same things that we don't need to do the exact same things that we did previously, right? We don't need to follow that path of just adding, patching on extensions to a language that once had a specific purpose and a direction, and now it's got 100 different ways of doing the same thing. Is there an example like this? Sure, we can look again back to Smalltalk, an object-oriented programming language that was built for that specific use case. We could go back and say, well, it's not performant, but I think with the fact that you could do a lot in those days, in 1970s and early 80s with a GUI, the biggest change has been with the internet, right? With developing languages on the internet. And one of the things Alan Kay mentioned and I think I agree with him, was that in the early 90s, it was just we were way behind internet development, and we were falling into the same problem of developing on the internet by following the same path of having things be limited uh, based on requirements that aren't necessarily a limitation of the technology. And what I mean by that is, say, for instance, the keyboard that we're using now, right, this one here, is an evolution of the technical limitations that happened in the 60s that then fed into the tools and development of keyboard and hardware that was in the 70s and 80s. And then that's kind of evolved, and we've carried over these specific limitations just because we're used to it. We're used to using a keyboard with the keys where they are. So what am I going to do personally? Uh, well, my goal is actually, I'm really still fascinated with pharmacology. And I have this book called Artificial Chemistry. So I want to read through that, and I want to see if I can work out a way to transfer the algorithms into a specific language that may be useful for artificial chemistries, artificial biology, and something like that. I know it's kind of like a long-term uh, it's a long-term project, but I'm sort of taking my steps forward with it. And that's kind of I want to fit that with part and parcel with the pharmacology channel that I want to do. But again, this is a tech channel. I want to focus on the tech aspects of doing this. So I think it's a great unison of these two interests. And again, just because it's been done before, I think the takeaway from this is just because it's been done before, it doesn't mean we should continue to do it. And the other thing is just because something seems like a cool technology, it doesn't necessarily mean that it should be implemented in a specific language. I guess that's it. Now I'm going to get back to coding in Swift and trying to debug, apps by rebuilding them. And that was one last thing. The fact that we still have to rebuild a project in order to debug code in Swift for the iPhone or Mac is something that has been carried over from the 1960s. I mean, there were solutions to this even in Visual Basic back in the 80s and 90s. Why it's still a problem, 30 years later, I don't know. And it made me think, watching some of the Alan Kay stuff, is why we're accepting this is the status quo. I don't think it should be. Okay, guys, thanks for listening. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.